Traveling over the Allegheny Ridge was not easy. Native Americans crossed on foot along the Katanning Trail. Following them were settlers and the teamsters who drove wagons on the Huntington, Cambria, and Indiana Turnpike. Then came the Portage Railroad, quickly replaced by the Pennsylvania Railroad when the Horseshoe Curve was built. The natural resources found in our area attracted major industries and the people to work in them. We've had iron and steel making, and coal mining, and railroading, three major industries that depended on each other then and now. Coal fired the mills that turned out the steel to be transported by rail. These industries attracted thousands of immigrants. They were our grandparents and our great-grandparents and our great-great-grandparents. Their names bear modern testimony to the ethnic and cultural diversity of our ancestors.
Now the West is within your reach. Open skies will greet you there. In a time not so long from now, trains will take you everywhere. So when you see a train upon the track, think of the rails beneath her wheels. And don't forget the men who put them there. Railroad
Victor
workers,
Hunter,
men of steel.
Homer George, Joseph Genter and his wife, Martin Smolko.
These are some of the people who shaped our history. They built the canal system, the Portage Railroad, and the Horseshoe Curve. They survived the Johnstown flood of 1889, and they struggled to improve working conditions in the coal mines. They are some of the people who drove the engine of America.
We started out from Philly with dreams of heading west. They told us that for traveling, the main line was the best. Instead of north to Erie or south to C&O, it had to be the main line, the fastest way to go.
Pennsylvania's first modern statewide transportation system consisted of canals connecting with rivers to form 800 miles of waterway, and of rail lines, which ran for 117 miles. They increased passage and commerce between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, as well as points west. When the canal reached Hollidaysburg, it opened up Blair County and turned the Juniata Iron District from a local operation to a major producer. This is how one canal traveler described Hollidaysburg in 1835.
Hollidaysburg has the air of a new clearing and looks so unfinished that one might suppose it to have been built within a year. Its site is good, rising gradually from the basin to a pleasant elevation. Many substantial buildings are going up, and it is evident that rapid increase is the destiny of the town.
Hollidaysburg blossomed as an industrial and transportation center. The Ganister rock and silica sand found in the area were shipped to all parts of the United States in the mid-1800s. Hollidaysburg was considered one of the most prosperous communities between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. For a short time, Hollidaysburg was a major center for building canal boats. It was no accident that a major change in canal boats occurred in Hollidaysburg. David Tate Kramer of Hollidaysburg became a mule driver at the age of 10. He would lead the mules along the canal bank, stopping every 10 miles to change mules. David walked anywhere from 8 to 18 miles a day, depending on the load, and usually worked a 6-hour shift.
We had to obey a state speed limit of 4 miles an hour. Since we were moving so slowly, our passengers could jump off the boat, raid a farmer's field, and get back on. I shouldn't tell you this, but sometimes the crew did it too. After all, if you saw a stray chicken or fresh corn, well, that was a feast compared to what they served us.
Getting over the ridge was something else. To solve that problem, the state authorized the building of the Portage Railroad, which went from Hollidaysburg to Johnstown. But the railroad could not go straight up the mountain because the angle was too steep.
We never were expecting the ride that we would get. Canal boats, trains, and inclines, timetables had been set. An engineering marvel, most everyone would say, to cross the Alleghenies in only a few days.
And so the Portage Railroad was designed around 10 inclines, 5 going up and 5 going down. Think of them as staircases connected to landings. The boats would be pulled from landing to landing. It was quite a trip. The British author Charles Dickens traveled by canal from Harrisburg to Hollidaysburg and then onward by way of the Portage Railroad.
Occasionally, the rails are laid upon the extreme verge of a giddy precipice, and looking from the carriage window, the traveler gazes sheer down, without a stone or a scrap of fence between, into the mountain depths below.
Travelers on the Portage Railroad went through one tunnel that was 900 feet long. Constructed between 1831 and 1834, it was the first railroad tunnel built in America, and it was built through solid rock in the ridge. One problem with taking a canal boat was that passengers had to disembark when they reached the Portage Railroad, then take a train over the mountain, and then get into another boat. But John Dougherty of Mount Union experimented with Jesse Chrisman's boat and changed the face of canal transportation.
All I did was suggest that the entire boat be lifted on a flat car and taken over the mountain and then put back in the water. Now, we did that with Mr. Chrisman's boat without disturbing his family, and they were able to continue on their trip to Illinois. Now, this experiment led to the design of special canal boats that could be loaded onto special rail cars using a boat slip. And people could board their canal boat in Philadelphia and never get out until Pittsburgh.
In other words, they didn't have to get out if they didn't want to. But when they got to Crescent Summit, there passengers found Samuel Lemon's house. There they could get off and rest a bit and eat and drink.
I built the house around 1832 before the workers had even finished laying the first track. It was a house for me and my kin. The tavern was a popular place.
Let's hear it for Sam Lemon, the keeper of the inn. So raise your glasses, laddies, here's to Sam and all his kin. We're here to drink and dine in a tavern made of stone, up on Allegheny Mountain in a time so long ago.
Living where I did, I saw several accidents. Sometimes the locomotive boilers exploded or the tow ropes broke. Someone devised a safety car which was attached to the rail car and served as an automatic brake when a tow rope broke. The original ropes were made of hemp. By 1850, the Allegheny Portage Railroad substituted what we called wire rope, which had been developed by John Roebling. That helped avert a lot of accidents.
Roebling went on to use the wire rope in the Brooklyn Bridge. The primary source of labor for the canals came from immigrants from Ireland. The Irish also served as the primary labor source for the building of the Horseshoe Curve. And oh, did those Irishmen work hard and steady and do a fine job. They created an engineering feat still marveled about in modern time. The canal and railroad system in place in the early to middle part of the 1800s was slow. Canal boats could not operate when the canals froze over or the water level dipped, and the Allegheny Portage Railroad did not operate at night. The trip between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia took nearly 4 days, and that was in the best of circumstances. J. Edgar Thompson, then the chief engineer of the Pennsylvania Railroad, oversaw the surveys that led to the Horseshoe Curve. Later, as president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, he developed the financial strategy that got it built. Let him tell about the engineering feat.
Every place we checked along the ridge, we realized that the grade was too steep. We needed to find a way to build a grade our locomotives could reasonably climb. That's why we developed the curve. Now, what we did was cut out the side of the mountain and fill as needed to create a curve that would reduce what would have been a 4.37% grade to a 1.8% grade at the most. We tripled the distance we had to lay track, but we created a grade that locomotives could easily climb out of Altoona and onto the ridge.
Altoona was the site of the Pennsylvania Railroad's principal car shops and major engine terminal. A half-century later, the railroad built a test plant in Altoona that made scientific contributions to the rail industry nationwide. In a similar way, the Silicon Valley in California contributes to the computer industry today. The Altoona test plant grew out of the same inventive spirit that built the Horseshoe Curve and designed the Portage Railroad. In building the curve, the 450 Irish laborers had their work cut out for them. All they had were picks, shovels, wheelbarrows, sledges, hand drill bars for boring shot holes, and their strong backs. They used black powder as their explosive. The only piece of big equipment was a 5-ton rail car into which the laborers dumped earth that was used later on for fill. The curve's success was instantaneous. It opened with just one track, but reduced the trip between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia to 17 hours. It wasn't long before a second track was added, and then a third, and a fourth. But the Pennsylvania Railroad's success with Horseshoe Curve meant the end for the Allegheny Portage Railroad. It could not compete, and it was out of business a mere 20 years after opening. In fact, the Cambria Tribune of Johnstown carried advertisements not only announcing the direct rail link, but noting that the fare was lower and that passengers would avoid the inclined planes of the Allegheny Portage Railroad. Because the Pennsylvania Railroad decided to put its main shops in Altoona, the role of Hollidaysburg as a transportation center diminished. The rapid increase predicted as its destiny by that canal traveler in 1835 would not come true. And remember those Irish laborers? Some of their descendants still live in the area and continue to take pride in the Horseshoe Curve. And the railroad, by the way, attracted immigrants from Italy, including Giulio Brandamarte and Oscar Salpino, who gave it years of exemplary service. Their names have been given to curves located near the Gallitzin tunnels. In building the Horseshoe Curve, man conquered nature. But on May 31, 1889, nature overwhelmed the residents of the Johnstown area. The water in Lake Conemaugh broke through the breast of its dam, resulting in a flood that killed 2,200 people and became an international news event. Lake Conemaugh does not exist today. You can see its remains at St. Michael on the top of the mountain 450 feet above Johnstown. It originally was built to supply water to the canal system in the Johnstown Basin, the canal that carried traffic to the Portage Railroad. Eventually, the dam was sold to the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, a close-knit group of wealthy people from Pittsburgh. They provided the money to run industries in Pittsburgh that served America. They spent their summers at the club, fishing, sailing, or just relaxing.
Sailboats on the mountain, hundreds of miles from the sea, sailing on a mountain top in fairy tales and dreams. Sailboats on the mountain, hundreds of miles from the sea, sailing on a mountain top in fairy tales and dreams.
Victor Heiser of Johnstown used to ride his horse out to the club, from which he and most other local residents were excluded.
There was a fence around the place where we had to get it. We had to get in through there. And there were nice farms all the way right up to the place.
Yeah.
And of course, this roads are now. It was a very poor road. You couldn't have run an automobile over it, but for riding it was all right, and the farmers used to market their produce with their wagons that way.
In those days, Johnstown was the steel center of the country, and its major industry was Cambria Iron Works, employing nearly 7,000 men. It also owned coal mines, coke ovens, railroads, and a steel company. Thanks to the leadership of Daniel Morrell, Cambria Iron Works used the latest technology for making high-quality steel, and that helped Johnstown lead the nation. Cambria Iron Works owned Johnstown. It built 700 houses that it rented to its employees. It owned the biggest store in town. The strong economy brought on by Cambria Iron Works enabled people like Victor Heiser's father to operate a private store. Heiser's father owned a dry goods store, similar to the one John Stenger owned, and one of Heiser's cousins worked for Stenger.
We sold groceries and feed and dry goods and all sorts of things. I was brought up, of course, to work in the store long before I was 16.
Johnstown was taking shape.
Most of the buildings were wood buildings.
Practically all except on Main Street there, most of them were brick. The town was very well organized. I mean, the streets were swept regularly and by the city, and things were kept fairly good shape.
Ever since the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club had gotten underway in 1881, the residents of Johnstown had heard rumors during heavy rains that the dam was about to break. In between, they endured several floods, and they grew cynical about suggestions that the dam would ever break.
Every time we had high water, that was all the talk of the town. The dam would break. Well, then it didn't break, and finally everybody thought it was a good joke that everybody talking about something was going to happen and never did. We had water up on Washington Street the first time in any flood. We've never had high water before. Yeah. You see, it rained, I think, 27 inches, something like that. It was a regular cloudburst that occurred.
And then the dam broke. It gave way in the middle. The water slid through the breastworks and plunged down the mountain at up to 40 miles an hour. As it roared down the South Fork of the Little Conemaugh River, it picked up everything in its path and carried it along. At South Fork, Homer George saw it coming. 20 million tons of water.
I have never forgotten the sight of that vast amount of water.
Train engineer John Hess began driving his train backwards down the valley toward East Conemaugh, blowing the locomotive's whistle all the way.
Tie that whistle down, John Hess, tie that whistle down. Give warning, fair warning, that's their only chance to live.
And then the water hit Johnstown. 7 decades later, Victor Heiser still remembered the day. First, he heard it.
When this terrible noise came, my father heard that and saw me. I was trying to get back to the house, and he saw me.
Urged from a distance by his father to seek higher ground, Heiser had reached the roof of the barn, safe for a moment.
And the next second, it seemed to me just a minute, maybe it wasn't a minute, it struck our house and just gone like that. It was crushed, and the barn toppled over, and I had to run up on one side, and then we began gathering speed. Yeah. And I saw a house the fence house right in the way. And at the speed, I thought I'd be knocked off. Well, the impact took place. And by that time, my stable, all that was left of it that I could see was a raft about the size of this room. Yeah. I could recognize it with a tin roof.
Heiser was carried along in the debris.
All I saw was wreckage. And my whole idea was to keep on getting on top. Yeah. And I climbed and climbed and climbed.
Eventually, Heiser found refuge on the roof of a still-standing building. He and others spent the night inside. Heiser eventually reached a stone bridge which had served as a blockade and collector of debris. Among the debris were human beings.
When I got down there to the bridge, this thing was burning, and I heard cries, and another man near me. I said, let's go and see what this is. And we went out, and here was a woman caught with her leg in the wreckage, and the fire coming on. Well, we had no tools or anything. We tried our darndest to pull her out, and we just couldn't. We stayed there as long as we could, and we had to see that woman burn to death right before our eyes.
Oh, my God.
God, it was a frightful sight.
2,209 people were killed in the flood, including Heiser's parents. Rescue efforts began immediately. Clara Barton brought her newly created Red Cross to Johnstown to assist, and additional aid poured in. Johnstown was reborn. The break in the dam provided the Pennsylvania Railroad with an opportunity to run a rail line up the valley. The Berwind White Coal Mining Company could now link St. Michael with its main operation at Windber. Many people had known about the rich deposits of coal in the area, but until the railroad provided transportation to outside markets, mining was not a major activity. The opportunities for work attracted a new wave of immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe.
Miners at Windber had a much harder fate. They worked 10 long hours while others worked just 8. They knew they had to organize, the union was their choice. But the company refused to hear, the miners had no voice, and the boss said...
Work conditions were often poor, and workers unionized wherever they could. Joseph Genter of Spangler led the organizing campaign in Windber.
The men at Windber had several grievances. They were working 10 hours a day, while men at other mines were working 8. They weren't being paid for so-called dead work. That is, the time they spent cleaning their tools, clearing the rock, or shoring the ceilings in the mine shafts. They weren't happy with the company store and the company hospital because they had no say in its operation. And they had no job protection. If they dissented, they were fired. In fact, if you said something to upset the boss, he'd say, "Take your tools and go."
The company gave them no choice, the walkout they staged. They wanted just to make a point, no tempers were raised. But 2 days later, men appeared with messages for all. The company was evicting them, they heard the union call. When the boss said, "Take your tools and go," the union cried, "Strike, boys, strike."
One of the major local organizers was Paul Bills.
We staged a walkout on April 2nd, and 2 days later the company sent the sheriff to evict us and our families from company housing. We had 5 days to get out.
The local was gaining strength. More than 2,000 miners attended a meeting and listened to speeches in Polish, Slovak, Magyar, Italian, and English. Joe Genter's wife spoke in English.
It was quite an assembly. The men really cheered when I said, "Praise God, there are no more scabs in Windber."
Ethnic newspapers also covered the strike. Martin Smolko, who worked at scalp level, wrote to the National Slovak newspaper.
I wanted my countrymen to know how we had been enslaved, but I also wanted to warn them that the company would try to recruit my brothers to mine in my place. That is, to scab. I ended my letter by saying, "All for one and one for all."
Eventually, the company and the miners began negotiating. Charles Shank was president of the Windber Local and the chief negotiator.
We made some progress. The company agreed to some of our demands, but when they said they wanted to impose their wage scale, which was 3 years out of date, I said, "Well, boys, there's nothing doing here. We might as well get out."
The massacre occurred the day after Easter. Paul Bills, who was wounded, tells the story.
We held a peaceful meeting outside of town where we were harassed by a constable. He fled to a councilman's home, and some of our numbers broke into the house and caused some damage looking for the constable. A little later, nearly a dozen miners were arrested and charged. None of them was involved, but they were taken to jail. A crowd assembled outside the jail, and at some point someone threw a stone or brick through a window in the jail. We started to walk away, but it was too late. The company had several guards outside the jail, and they fired on the crowd. They killed 3 men outright. They wounded me and shot a 10-year-old boy in the groin. 17 others had received some kind of wounds. The dead men were unarmed. The boy was just an onlooker. He died 2 days later.
Although Although the company guards were charged, they were never convicted for the wrongful deaths in Windber. The strike continued for 2 more months, and the company suffered because of reduced production, and the men and their families suffered the loss of wages. In July, the union settled its strike on the district level. Bargaining from a diminished position, the district could not include in the agreement newly established locals such as the one at Windber. It wasn't until the 1930s that miners were able to unionize at Windber without fear of reprisal.
Now the West is within your reach. Open skies will greet you there. In a time not so long from now, trains will take you everywhere.
Now you know how important the Allegheny Ridge was, not just to those who lived here, but to all of America. The resources and the people of the Allegheny Ridge were the engine of America during the Industrial Revolution. They helped make this country what it is today.
So when you see a train upon the track, think of the rails beneath her wheels. And don't forget the men who put them there, railroad workers, men of steel.
To learn more, visit the historical sites for a first-hand feeling, and visit your library for reading material on our industrial heritage.
We break our backs with pick and axe, with sweat and strain, we move the trains. With sweat and strain, we move the trains. With sweat and strain, we move the trains. With sweat and strain, we move the trains.
A copy of the program you've just seen can be purchased through Penn State Media Sales at mediasales.psu.edu or by calling 800-770-2111.